The little bell above the door of Miller's Corner Market jingled as the glass door swung open. The store was buzzing with the usual Friday evening traffic: parents picking up milk on their way home from work, kids grabbing candy before a movie night, and a few regulars hanging around the counter to chat with the clerk. Into this bustle stepped a teenage boy, maybe 16 years old, his hood pulled up against the chilly air outside. His sneakers squeaked faintly on the tile as he crossed the threshold, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't fidgeting. He just moved with the relaxed gait of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. He drifted down the snack aisle, his eyes scanning the shelves. First chips. He picked up a small bag, looked at the back, and nodded to himself. Then, he walked to the cooler, pulled out a soda, and carried both toward the counter. He stood out only because of his composure. Where other teens might have laughed too loudly or shoved each other, he was quiet, thoughtful, even polite, in the way he stepped aside to let another customer pass. He didn't glance nervously around or shove anything into his pockets. He was just shopping. But already, eyes were on him. Behind the counter, the store clerk watched closely, his jaw tightening. He leaned slightly forward, his gaze narrowing on the boy's hoodie and backpack, as if they were red flags. To him, it wasn't a kid picking up snacks. It was a problem waiting to happen. The boy, unaware of the suspicion building across the room, moved calmly toward the register, his money already in his hand. The bell jingled again as another customer entered, but the tension was beginning to shift, centered not on the store's bustle, but on the boy who had done nothing wrong. And that quiet tension was about to explode. The boy moved closer to the counter, snacks in one hand, cash in the other. His movements were ordinary, unhurried, but to the man behind the register, every step seemed suspicious. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a permanent frown, leaned slightly over the counter. His eyes never left the boy's hoodie, then darted to the backpack slung over his shoulder. He muttered under his breath, "Uh-huh, figures." Next to him, a younger cashier in training restocked gum packets. She glanced up at the tone in his voice. "What's wrong?" she whispered. The clerk jerked his chin toward the boy. "Keep an eye on him. Kids like that don't come in to pay. They come in to pocket whatever they can." The trainee frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "He's just holding chips and a drink." "Not yet," the clerk hissed. "Wait until you see him stuff something under that hoodie. Bet he's already hiding something." The trainee lowered her gaze, biting her lip, unwilling to argue, but clearly uneasy with the assumption. Meanwhile, the boy made his way up the last aisle, passing a mother with a toddler. He stepped politely aside so she could get by, murmuring a soft, "Sorry, ma'am," as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. The mother smiled faintly and moved on without a second thought. But from the counter, the clerk's suspicion only grew sharper. His posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing like a predator waiting to pounce. By the time the teen reached the register, the clerk's mind was already made up. To him, this wasn't a paying customer. It was a thief caught mid-act, and he was determined to call him out. The teenager stepped up to the counter, setting his bag of chips and soda neatly in front of him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, smoothing it against his palm before placing it on the counter. His expression was calm, expectant, like any other customer ready to check out. But the clerk didn't touch the money. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, his voice sharp enough to slice through the low hum of the store. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. The boy blinked, confused. "Sir." "You heard me," the clerk snapped, louder this time. "Empty your pockets and take off that backpack. Don't try to play slick with me. I saw you wandering the aisles. You're hiding something." The teenager's brows knit together. He glanced down at the snacks he had placed on the counter, then back at the man towering over him. "I didn't take anything," he said quietly. His voice was steady but soft, as if he already knew there was no convincing this man. By now, the exchange had drawn attention. A couple waiting in line froze, watching. An older man by the coffee machine turned his head sharply, frowning. Even the trainee next to the clerk looked up nervously, her hands twisting the gum packets she'd been stocking. The clerk's voice rose, fueled by the small crowd. "Don't lie to me, boy. I've been working here long enough to know your type." Hoodie pulled up, backpack half open. "You think I don't see what's going on?" You better prove you're not stealing, or I'm calling the cops. The teenager swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the strap of his bag. His cheeks burned, not from guilt, but from the sting of being accused in front of strangers. I came here to buy chips and a soda, he said softly, almost pleading. That's it. But the clerk sneered, jabbing a finger toward him. Yeah, sure. That's what you all say. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, filled with judgment, disbelief, and tension, so thick it seemed to stop the air from moving. And at the center of it all, a boy stood with nothing but his money and his dignity, both under attack. The boy's quiet insistence only seemed to ignite the clerk's anger further. His voice grew louder, carrying across the aisles and silencing the soft buzz of conversation. Don't play innocent with me, the clerk barked, slamming his palm down on the counter for emphasis. I've seen your kind come through here 100 times. Always the same story. Walk in like you're gonna buy something, then slip candy bars or batteries into your hoodie when you think nobody's watching. The teenager flinched slightly at the sudden noise, but held his ground. His hands were steady at his sides, though the heat in his cheeks betrayed his humiliation. He glanced quickly around, realizing everyone in the store was now watching. A woman near the door gasped softly. A man in line shook his head in disapproval. Not at the boy, but at the clerk's words. Even the trainee behind the counter looked stricken, whispering, Maybe you should just, before being cut off by the clerk's glare. Empty. Your pockets, the clerk repeated, each word punctuated with venom. Or I swear, I'll call the cops and have you dragged out of here. You people are always stealing. That last sentence cut sharper than anything else. The room tensed, the phrase hanging in the air like smoke from a fire. Some customers shifted uncomfortably. Others glared openly at the clerk. But no one spoke. The teenager's throat tightened. His heart pounded, but he forced his voice to stay calm. I don't have anything that doesn't belong to me. I came to pay. He lifted the crumpled $10 bill again, his voice breaking slightly now, not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being accused, judged, and belittled in front of strangers. The clerk scoffed. Yeah, right, always got an excuse. Well, we'll just see what the police have to say about it. He reached toward the phone on the counter, his eyes flashing with a self-righteous satisfaction. The store was silent except for the steady hum of the cooler. Every eye was locked on the boy, waiting for the scene to unfold. And just then, the bell above the door jingled again. The sharp jingle of the doorbell cut through the heavy silence like a sudden crack of thunder. Heads turned instinctively toward the entrance. Stepping inside was a tall black man in full uniform. Polished boots, crisp shirt, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His posture radiated authority, the kind that filled the room before he even spoke. It was Chief Daniels, the town's police chief, a man whose reputation for fairness was as widely known as his commanding presence. The clerk froze mid-motion, his hand hovering over the phone. Relief surged across his face, as if backup had just arrived. He puffed out his chest and pointed toward the teenager at the counter. Chief? Perfect timing. I've got a thief here. Caught him trying to play slick, hoodie, backpack, the whole deal. He was about to walk out with half the store. All eyes shifted back to the boy, who stood silently, his chips and soda still on the counter, his $10 bill crumpled tightly in his hand. His jaw was set, but his eyes glistened with the sting of humiliation. The chief's gaze moved from the clerk to the boy. His face, unreadable at first, softened in an instant. He stepped forward with a calm, deliberate stride, the kind that carried both weight and reassurance. When he reached the counter, he placed a steady hand on the teenager's shoulder. That's no thief, Chief Daniel said, his voice even but firm. That's my son. Gasps rippled through the store. The clerk's smug grin collapsed, his skin draining of color. His mouth opened, then closed again, no sound emerging. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy realization that every assumption, every cruel word, had just been shattered in an instant. The boy exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. Though his eyes never left the counter, he didn't need to say anything. His father's presence said it all. And the clerk? He suddenly looked very small behind the counter, that once made him feel so powerful. The clerk's face went pale, his earlier bravado melting away under the weight of the chief's words. He opened his mouth, fumbling for some excuse, but nothing came. His hand, still resting near the phone, trembled as he quickly pulled it back, as though the plastic receiver had burned him. "Chief, I didn't know," he stammered. "I just thought he looked suspicious." Chief Daniels cut him off with a steady look, his deep voice firm but not raised. "You thought wrong. My son came here to buy a soda and some chips. Money in his hand, items on the counter. That's not suspicious. That's being a customer." The clerk shifted uncomfortably, sweat beginning to form along his brow. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," the chief interrupted, his tone sharp now. "You meant every word you said. You meant it when you told him to empty his pockets. You meant it when you called him a thief in front of this entire store. And you meant it when you said, 'You people.'" The clerk's face flushed crimson, and he tried to glance away, but the chief stepped closer, his presence impossible to ignore. "This isn't about theft. It's about prejudice," the chief continued. "You didn't see a young man buying snacks. You saw a criminal because of the color of his skin, and you humiliated him in front of strangers, for no reason but your own bias." The store was silent, every customer frozen in place, the weight of the chief's words pressing down like a gavel striking in a courtroom. Even the trainee behind the counter looked stricken, her hands fidgeting nervously as she cast guilty glances toward the boy. The teenager stood quietly, his father's hand still steady on his shoulder. His eyes were low, but his back was straight. He didn't need to defend himself anymore. The truth was speaking for him. The clerk swallowed hard, fumbling for words. I didn't mean any harm. I just thought—" Chief Daniels fixed him with a stare that silenced the rest of his excuses. "Your thoughts nearly turned a simple stop at the store into a scar my son would carry for years. That's harm enough." The words landed like a verdict, undeniable and final. The room stayed hushed, the lesson sharp and inescapable. The store was so still, it felt as if even the buzzing of the refrigerator units had faded into silence. All eyes were on the chief, his hand still resting firmly on his son's shoulder. The boy looked down at his crumpled bill, then back up at his father, drawing strength from the steady weight of that touch. Chief Daniels straightened, his gaze sweeping across the clerk, the employees, and every customer who had witnessed the scene. His voice carried authority, not because it was loud, but because every syllable rang with conviction. "This is how prejudice works," he said, his eyes fixed on the clerk. "It doesn't come dressed in facts or evidence. It comes dressed in assumptions. My son came in here to buy chips and a drink, and instead of seeing a young man with money in his hand, you saw a thief, and you humiliated him for nothing." The clerk opened his mouth to respond, but the chief raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm not here to shout at you," the chief continued, "but I am here to remind you, and everyone else listening, that the uniform I wear doesn't just stand for law. It stands for justice. And justice starts with how we treat people, whether they're wearing a badge, a suit, or a hoodie." He turned briefly, looking down at his son. The boy met his eyes, and for a moment, the strength of that bond was more powerful than any lecture. Then, the chief guided him forward, gently nudging him toward the counter. "Pay for your things, son," he said softly. The boy placed the money on the counter, sliding it toward the stunned clerk. The clerk's hands trembled as he rang up the purchase and handed back the change without a word. His face was red, his shame written plainly for all to see. The chief took the bag from the counter, handed it to his son, and then turned back one last time. "Let today be a lesson," he said to the entire store. "Don't let your fear or your bias make you blind. Because the cost of those mistakes isn't just embarrassment, it's dignity. And dignity is something you don't get to take away from anyone." With that, he placed a protective hand on his son's back and walked him out of the store. The bell above the door jingled one last time. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was heavy with reflection. Customers shifted uneasily, some glaring at the clerk, others shaking their heads. The young trainee behind the counter looked down, ashamed, as if wishing she'd spoken up sooner. And in the middle of it all, the clerk stood alone behind the counter, replaying the moment over and over, knowing it would haunt him far longer than the echo of the closing door.